Robert Smithson was really fascinated by the idea of entropy. It's about temporality. It's about inevitable destruction. For him, monuments were a thing of the past. They were not relevant for his time. So Spiral Jetty fundamentally is not a monument. It's not static. It's a work that Smithson knew would really show the impact of entropy, that it will change, that it must change. It will disappear, just as we will disappear. It's an artwork that has a life, that has an existence.
Nothing has ever changed since I have been here, but I dare not infer from this that nothing ever will change. Let us try and see where these considerations lead.
Robert Smithson is an artist who experimented with every possibility of what art could be. I often think about his work as being an atmosphere, an attitude. He had a very short and very prolific career. He was born in 1938 and he passed away in 1973 in an airplane accident. He started out by doing various experiments with painting and with drawing. But it was in 1959 that he really started to focus his artistic practice. He made incredible works on paper that were exploring what he called the ruins of European art history. Drawings of monsters, of landscapes, of possibilities about the human relationship with the surface of the planet. Robert Smithson started around 1964 or so, making what he called quasi-minimal sculptures. Why quasi? Well, it's because there's something incredibly handmade about them. These are not machine-made perfection that we can see in so many of Smithson's peers. There's this sense of manual thinking within them. He worked with light, with neon. He worked with metals. He worked with plastics. He was very interested in the development of crystals, in their scientific development, but also in the ways in which they're used within more esoteric belief systems and philosophies. Then, in 1966, he started to think about the concept of sight, non-sight, about the sense of a here and elsewhere. And at that moment, he started traveling. He started stretching his life outside of urban centers. He really wanted to think about place.
Township 8, north of Range 7, west of the Salt Lake Basin meridian. Unsurveyed land on the bed of the Great Salt Lake, if surveyed, would be described as follows. Beginning at a point south 3,000 feet and west 800 feet from the northeast corner of Section 8, Township 8 north, Range 7 west.
Spiral Jetty is a mound of rocks about 15 feet wide that curls into the bed of the Great Salt Lake in Utah. I'm always amazed to think about the challenge of making something like Spiral Jetty happen. The work that went into realizing this thing and getting many different kinds of people along the way to say yes to helping him to make this happen. It's really a miracle that it's there at all.
Smithson had been looking for a site to create an earthwork of this magnitude, and he was particularly interested in the Great Salt Lake because there's this phenomenon in which the water is red. So when he found this site, he saw that color. He saw these rocks and the way in which the water intersects with it and sort of this dynamism. And he felt like the only form that could really capture and interact with this appropriately was this spiral.
When it was first made, it was surrounded by water. And you can see in a wonderful film that Smithson made. Now the water is not up close to it. And as the water recedes, also Spiral Jetty recedes.
Today, when you go to Spiral Jetty, you can clearly see the spiral shape. You can clearly see the basalt that Smithson used to make this artwork. And those rocks come from ancient volcanic activity. So Robert Smithson brought this construction crew to mine the basalt out of the local hills and to bring it to the site. I think that's why Spiral Jetty does echo the nature around it, but it also feels distinct in that there's no way to go past it without understanding that someone created it.
Smithson was using the earth itself in a way like graphite, pushing it into this spiral. So it was a gestural move, an action, as much as it is a form. Spiral Jetty entered the collection of DR Art Foundation in 1999.
It was a gift from the estate of Robert Smithson, which was managed by the artist Nancy Holt.
Nancy Holt and Robert Smithson were partners. And I think it's important to recognize the role that Nancy Holt played in the development of Spiral Jetty. She was right there and was central in the development of the film as well. After Smithson passed away at such a young age, while Nancy Holt continued to make important work herself as an artist, she really worked very dutifully and carefully to protect Robert Smithson's legacy and spent a lot of time and energy in developing that.
Our stewardship of Spiral Jetty is incredibly collaborative. We work with our state partners in Utah. We work with the Utah Museum of Fine Arts. We work with the Great Salt Lake Institute. And we also work, of course, with the Holt-Smithson Foundation. But Robert Smithson designed this artwork to change. So in that regard, we are not sort of manicuring this object. It's meant to be what it is and change in relationship to how the earth itself changes. Spiral Jetty is also an index of its time because I don't think artists would so readily alter the landscape today in these ways that could be seen as potentially extractive or violent to the surface of the land.
I think when we consider land art now, we need to really consider that land art is a provocation that starts a debate. And to really appreciate it, we need to interrogate it. Smithson was interested in that sense that the landscape is always marked by human activities. It was this industrially scarred landscape that intrigued him. And when he made Spiral Jetty, it was hard to get to. He wanted people to get lost. He wanted it to be somewhere that you might not even find. Now there's a clear road to it. But with Spiral Jetty, the journey is so important.
Spiral Jetty is located about 90 miles northwest of Salt Lake City.
As you leave Salt Lake City, you go north along the Wasatch Mountains, and you can see where the shoreline of ancient Lake Bonneville during the Ice Age was. So you would have been underwater in your journey, and sometimes I like to think about that as I'm driving north.
You take the exit for Corinne, Utah.
Then you come down this little projection into Great Salt Lake that's called Promontory Point. And as you get onto that road, you come across the Golden Spike National Monument.
That's where the two railroad companies, one from the east and one from the west, met. And that really changed the world.
As you continue on your journey, you launch onto this dirt road, and about a decade ago, the county decided that they had rescued just too many people. And so they decided to grade the road and make it more passable. But when I see Robert Smithson's film, it always reminds me of how rugged it used to be.
It's probably another 30 minutes on this graded dirt and gravel road. And you can start to sort of see the lake in the distance, and you'll first see the old oil jetty. And in Smithson's time and in the early photographs, there were some abandoned vehicles and an old trailer and sort of things that were on that site, which are no longer there. But you kind of come around that corner and the excitement builds. You know that it's there.
Once you've made your journey and you're outside of your vehicle, you're still not there yet because you kind of have to trepidatiously go down this very steep hill that's very rocky. There's no like trail or anything. So you're making your way down and you can see the Spiral Jetty. And to be honest, it looks smaller than what you'd expect because you're always seeing it from like these aerial views and these photos. And because there's nothing around it, it's hard to understand scale.
Everybody pretty much does the same thing, which you see Smithson do in the film himself, which is you walk out onto the rocks until you get to the center in the point. And in the many, many, many times I've been there in the 20 years I've been in Utah, it never ever looks or feels the same. It can be really beautiful, like astonishingly beautiful. I think sunrise and sunset, especially because the lake has a quality of disappearing into the sky. But I've been out there at times where it's really hot and there's no shade. So you really don't know what you're going to get. And I think it's so unique and interesting to encounter a work where you're different from the last time you made the trip to visit it, and it's different too.
Smithson was aware that the Great Salt Lake is a site of change. And Smithson was led to that site by the particular and the peculiar color of the water.
In 1970, you couldn't just get on the internet or look at Instagram. You had to hear from people, and there was a state official that he talked to in Utah who said, yeah, there's this part of Great Salt Lake, which is called Roselle Bay, that can be like this tomato red color. And he couldn't let that go. And that pink color is actually one of the things I work on that makes this site so important. I work on the organisms that live in that water and make it pink. These particular microbes are called halophiles, which is the Greek word for salt. So they're literally salt lovers, and they have pigments in them which help protect their cells from all the UV light and the high salt and the extreme conditions. And that's what makes them that beautiful color. Brine flies and brine shrimp depend on these microorganisms that live in the lake. Those guys and some other invertebrates in the wetlands feed 10 million birds. So this lake has become one of phenomenal importance.
When Smithson made Spiral Jetty, he was really interested in how it interacted with the water. But I don't think he could have possibly presaged how much this piece would become an index for the shifting water levels. When Spiral Jetty was made, it was in water, but it wasn't fully submerged. So over the course of around 30 years, it became fully submerged and you couldn't really even see it, and actually only revealed itself in 2002.
I first visited the site in 1998, and I canoed on top of Spiral Jetty when the water was really deep. As it became exposed in the early 2000s, I would go there to do my field work, and suddenly it was like this artwork was being birthed out of the water, and the colors, the black basalt and the white salt crystals and the red water. It was just an amazing place to go and work. And then the water started retreating as the lake was shrinking. The water level now is almost a mile away from the artwork, and that is a travesty. And I think Spiral Jetty has been a wonderful voice to exclaim to the world what's going on, what this crisis is. Look how far away the water is. Look at how the lake is shrinking. So to me, this artwork speaks.
That's something that can be felt on the level of the body when you're out there. You can walk all the way to the water and feel that distance. And you can see, as we have photographed this piece from an aerial view each year, how it literally is marking and indexing time, but it also indexes the way in which humans have a really drastic impact on the environment, and in this case, not a positive one.
13,000 years ago, the current margins of Great Salt Lake were formed, and that's about the time that people came into the state of Utah. So humans lived alongside the lake. The original people of Utah, their descendants, those modern people are still present, but many of them were displaced by the European descendants that moved westward. As more people moved here, they started damming up areas and producing salt. They built a railroad across the middle of Great Salt Lake. So suddenly you have all of this pressure on the lake, native people displaced, and humans are overusing a resource, and that resource is water. That consumptive use means that less water makes it to Great Salt Lake. The other thing that's happening is that the salt doesn't evaporate, so it gets saltier and saltier. And now you don't see the brine shrimp and the brine flies at Spiral Jetty. You don't see all of these amazing 338 species of birds because they can't handle that level of salt. So what we're seeing at Great Salt Lake is an ecological catastrophe. The part of the lake where Spiral Jetty sits really is an example of what the rest of the lake will look like if we continue to use too much water and water doesn't get there to feed the ecosystem.
The environmental situation with Great Salt Lake is really at a crisis point. And it is really interesting to think about the ways in which Spiral Jetty, this unimaginably important artwork made in the 20th century, sited in this rural and very unique place, has become a marker for the effects of climate change and the very real impact of these issues on communities of people living near and around Great Salt Lake.
Smithson was acutely aware of our relationship with the environment. But for him, environmentalism was never about turning the clock back. It was about looking at the brutality of what we have done.
This artwork is no more permanent than the landscape it's in, and one day it might be gone. And I think Robert Smithson would love that.
I remember coming across it when I was a student, and it seemed the most incredible addition to the world. It made me think about geological time. It made me think about human time. It made me think about the collaboration between those two different time scales. And it really made me believe that art matters in the world. For me, that is why Spiral Jetty is so important.